Hi everyone, and thank you all for joining. My name is Rob Barrows, and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. And we're joined today by Richard Miller from Miller Klein Associates Limited. So this is a retrofit information support and expertise event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, delivered by Turner & Townsend. So there'll be a relatively short presentation, then time for a few questions, and then we'll go back to another little bit of a presentation from Richard, and then another bit of time for some questions. Could I just ask everyone, please keep your microphones muted and cameras switched off during the presentations. The slide deck will be made available after the event in a follow-up email to everyone that's attended today, and there'll also be a recording of this masterclass also sent out and available on the RISE website, and we will provide links very shortly in the chat. Please ask questions in the chat function as we go along, and if you don't want to put them in the chat, feel free to ask them in any of the break sessions. And finally, there'll be a quick poll and word cloud at the end of the session. If you could please fill those in and respond to those, just so we can understand kind of the level of knowledge that we're providing in our content, that'd be really appreciated. So I will hand over to Richard to kick off today's session.
Thank you very much, Rob, and welcome everybody. So the topic today is building and sustaining stakeholder buy-in, and in order to cover that topic, we're going to look at two chunks of activity. We're going to look at why we need to do this, the challenge of buy-in and maintaining alignment, how it runs throughout the project, the issue of constantly reinforcing the project goals and plan, and we'll set out a framework for telling the story. At that point, we'll have a quick break for people to contribute their own experiences, their own thoughts, questions, comments, any ideas. We'll take them at that point, and then we'll move into a deep dive into, or relatively deep dive into, some tools and techniques that may be useful to you, particularly about knowing your story, aligning with stakeholder interests, and then telling the story effectively. And then again, at the end, we'll have a brief session for questions, thoughts, and comments. And we will definitely be finished by the hour. I can guarantee you that. It may be finished a little sooner, just depending on how the discussion period goes. So let's dive in. So the point that I'm trying to make about the topic really is this is a constant piece of activity. We need to constantly work on stakeholder buy-in and alignment. Yes, we know we've got to do stuff at the beginning because you've got to get approvals from budget holders, you've got to submit applications for funding. There's all kinds of work you need to do at the beginning to make sure that the key stakeholders are behind you and you get the go-ahead. But there is a tendency, if you're not careful, to assume that once the project has been approved, it's just a question of execution, and you forget to keep people informed, keep people engaged, keep dealing with the alignment issues. And there are lots and lots of different stakeholders that you need to keep together to deliver a successful project. I mean, obviously, the people who are monitoring the project, the people who are looking at the funding you're getting, they need to be kept on board. Your tenants need to be kept on board. Your supply chain needs to be kept on board. Key departments within your organizations need to be kept on board. Local authority, possibly. The surrounding community. There's lots and lots of people that you need to keep with you to deliver a successful project. And if they lose interest, become despondent, find problems, then it can be quite difficult to make progress. So, yes, it's important that you have a plan, you get it approved, but then it's not just a matter of execution. You need to work constantly on communications to hold the project together. Now, why is that? All kinds of reasons. Teams rarely last for long. People are always coming and going. And a project of this kind of scale, may last a couple of years very easily, 3 years if you involve all the setup as well. These are long-term projects. There's monitoring, if you're following PAS 2035, there's monitoring of the performance of properties after the installation has been done, after the work is completed. So there's quite a long period in which you need people to be following the project and delivering their part of the project. And that's really difficult in this day and age. People are coming and going all the time, including in your suppliers and contractors. It's not just your own team, it's suppliers and contractors. And all of this coming and going and moving around and people changing responsibility creates risks throughout the project. It becomes very difficult to maintain and keep that alignment and keep everybody working, pulling in the same direction. And as people get into their tasks, very often they get their heads down, they focus, this is my bit, this is what I have to deliver, I understand it, right, I'm going to get on with it. And they stop paying attention to the rest of the project. And what that can lead to is groups and individuals start spinning off in all directions. Right? You need to keep them together and aligned and all pulling in the same direction. And something I'll keep talking about is building and maintaining stakeholder engagement and stakeholder buy-in is all about communications, communications, communications. You cannot communicate too much. And you think about all the different groups involved in your supply chain. Are they aware of anything that's changing? Are they up to speed? Do they remember what the project set out to do, what the criteria was, what the timeline looks like? Or are they just become focused on their little bit of the project? So you must keep reminding people of the project goal, what we set out to do. Even when we're down in the weeds dealing with today's crisis, suppliers gone bankrupt, materials aren't available. We found a horror story when we opened the roof space of a set of properties. Yeah, those things will happen and you have to get down in the weeds and deal with them. But it's always vitally important to remember the project goal, what you are setting out to do, where you are heading. And this is a quote from a CEO I worked with who was involved in delivering a major restructuring of a multinational company. And what he said was, when you've told the story so many times that you just can't bear to do it again, you have just begun to communicate. And yes, you do have to start with getting commitment from your senior team. And to get senior buy-in, you must tell a convincing story about the project. Facts and projections on their own are not enough. People need to feel the importance of the project. And you're selling the project to a bunch of experienced people with different backgrounds, approaches, and responsibilities, different levels of focus, different challenges hitting their in tray. And you need to make the project relevant to each one of them, to connect with them in written argument and in presentations. They have a lot going on. You will have to fight for mind space to show that this is a priority for them. So particularly in that initial phase, when you're trying to get the overall commitment to the project from your senior team, begin warming them up early. Most executives don't like to be suddenly confronted with a project and bounced into a decision. Your chances of success are greater if they've seen the idea grow over time, and even better if they've been involved in developing the idea. So no surprises, but also for the other key teams you need. If it's vital that procurement works very well with you to deliver the project, make sure that the people you're dealing with are talking to the head of procurement, right? So that the idea that this is a good project and this is the way to go about it is filtering up to that top decision-making level. And for each department you need support from, make sure that you're selling the project in. Because executives are human. This is a quote from a chief finance officer of a multinational company, and they're right what they say. Decisions are not rational and logical. Sometimes they're downright irrational and illogical. That doesn't necessarily make them wrong. So return on investment calculations never persuaded the board to do what they didn't want to do, or persuaded them not to do what they wanted to. And that really goes to the point that it's not the numbers, it's not the return on investment calculation. They need to see the whole picture and see how it fits together. So your job is to understand what that senior team is worrying about and to show them how this project solves problems, helps them meet their objectives. And by explaining the project in their terms, by reaching out to them and showing that you understand their challenges, you can move it up their priority list. And then you have to repeat the exercise with all of the other teams that you need to engage and bring on board, all the other stakeholder groups. So this is a framework for developing and using your story to get commitment and maintain alignment. You have to be clear what the story is. To create a compelling story, you must be clear on what the project will deliver, why it is important to your organization, and how you will deliver it. So that's your business case. And there are materials on the RISE website. There are recordings of talks about business cases and how you build them. There's a toolkit for help you to build a business case. And that will make sure that whatever format you ultimately have to put the business case in, but what the project is, why it matters, and how you're going to deliver it is absolutely clear. And so that forms the part you really need to understand. You really have to internalize this and be very clear about this, because the next step is aligning the project with the goals and needs of the organization and the important stakeholder groups. And there can be issues related to the internal strategy of the organization, the corporate strategy. So can you show that the project is hitting the key targets that are set in the corporate strategy? There may be external forces, trends and drivers, new regulations coming in, things like that. And there are the wants and needs of specific individuals or teams. If you're going to get help from the procurement team, what do you have to do? How do you have to tell the story to them in order to get their support? Because even if the executives do like the project and do give it the rubber stamp, you've still got to get the help you need from everyone else. How are you going to make this important to key players in your supply chain, to key contractors? How does it compare with their other requirements, their other projects? How do you make it work for them? So think about how it aligns with the strategy of the organization, the external drivers that the organization is facing, and the wants and needs of specific groups. And then once you've got the story clear and well aligned, then you actually have to tell the story effectively. And these will come back to in more detail in the second half, but that is about reducing the complexity of your story, adapting it to different audiences, so being able to tell the story with different emphasis, with different content to different stakeholder groups, and then using that story to convince. And so we're going to pull this diagram apart in the next section. So just to summarize these key points, you've got to get commitment from all stakeholder groups. And it is in the nature of projects that focus will dissipate. So people will start to drift. They'll get their heads down, do the bit they're responsible for. They won't be paying attention to everything else that's going on. And so a project can drift into components that are no longer aligned and working together. So keeping everybody aligned is absolutely critical. Now, communication comes in there, and you must communicate relentlessly. Doing an enormous amount of communication, but if you're only talking to one stakeholder group at a time, right, then your touch points with them can be quite some time apart, and things can easily go wrong. So communicating relentlessly is part of holding this commitment from the stakeholders together. So make the project story clear, align it with the stakeholder interests in terms of the strategy, the drivers they face, and their particular wants and needs. And then you've got to tell the story effectively. And as I said, we'll go into that in the next section, telling the story effectively. And story is an important word, because sometimes we think, particularly if we're technically minded, we think that the facts speak for themselves. And if you've got the facts in place, then that's what people need to know, and they will buy into that. And it will be clear, it will be obvious, and everyone will agree because the logic is impeccable. Mostly it doesn't work like that. And so you do have to think about it in terms of telling a story. And so the important parts of that are knowing what the story is, making sure it's aligned with your audiences, and then being able to tell that story in multiple different ways and at multiple different times. So looking at these parts of the framework, let's think about what the story is first. So this is the model that we've used with SHDF funding for describing the business case. What are the key questions to which you have to have answers in order to build a business case, no matter what format it's in, no matter what kind of application form you have to fill in, what your internal organization requires in terms of business case. These are the questions, right? So what is the outcome of the project? If we do this project, what will happen? What are the benefits of that project? So we do this project, it succeeds, then who's going to benefit? Is it financial benefit? Is it knock-on benefits in ease of operation? Is it benefits to where are the benefits that you're going to deliver? The actions that you're going to undertake to deliver the outcome and thus the benefits, and the strategic purpose, right? Why are we doing this? Where does it fit in? And then practical issues like what's it going to cost? How are we going to finance this? What resources are going to be needed to deliver this? What procurement strategy are we going to have to undertake? And then the risk management. What are the risks? How do we mitigate them? How do we manage those risks? So those are the fundamentals of your business case. And what that deals with is the what, the why, and the how of the project. The what is the outcomes, benefits, and the actions you're going to take. That describes the project. The why is the fit with the strategic challenges of the organization, the strategic objectives. And then the how is all those things about, well, we're going to have to find money in this way. We're going to have to deal with a new set of contractors. We need new procurement strategies. We're going to have to engage with these people and so on and so forth. So this is all about getting clear about what your project is and having that really embedded in your mind. Because if you really understand your project, then you can communicate it in multiple different ways to different groups of people at different times with confidence and with the right information. What I always say to people is if you can't write down the project on one side of A4, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it. This is why it matters. And this is how we're going to go about it. This is the plan. If you can't write that on one side of A4, you probably don't understand your project. So it's a good discipline to get that confidence. And the reason for being very, very clear on the story of the what, the why, and the how is you will be competing with other priorities. You've got other people's ideas of what is important, perhaps other legal requirements. How can you deal with that? You don't want to attack the other priorities because they're real, but ideally you can show how you can tackle them at the same time you're doing the retrofit. For example, if you need to replace boilers, getting the insulation right at the same time makes the process cheaper and faster. If you're replacing the kitchen, why not sort out the windows and insulation at the same time to cut the time and reduce the mess and inconvenience? And you're balancing upfront costs versus speed versus lower overall costs, all those kinds of things. Yes, it might cost you more, but you can make a case that this is a more efficient way to do it. So dealing with those other priorities, recognizing the other priorities, and being confident in the project story is important. The risk register is a great summarizing tool for the project status. So you're probably all familiar with risk registers, probably had to fill them in yourself. If you haven't had to, again, there's material on the RISE website that can help you with that. But essentially, you're asking yourself the question, what could go wrong? How likely is it to go wrong? How bad would it be if it did go wrong? And what can we do to reduce the impact of that risk and reduce the chance of it happening? So how can we mitigate it? What can we do about that in our project planning? And this is something that you have to do in many styles of project management and many sources of funding. Will you demand you do this on a regular basis and keep a risk register and keep it up to date? It is often seen as a piece of bureaucracy. something you have to put up with, but something which really doesn't add a lot of value to your project. And you can see that because I've reviewed hundreds and hundreds of risk registers for people applying for funding for different sources to take projects forward. In most cases, the risk register is pretty bare. I actually have seen projects where people say there are no risks to this project. It's all going to go swimmingly. There's nothing to worry about. Rarely do you see a risk register and a risk analysis that actually looks like they've thought about what could go wrong. The point about thinking about what can go wrong is, again, coming back to communication. It gives you the chance to communicate the issues. So I think the risk register is a vastly underused tool for communicating the project status because it's going to change. Right? If you're doing the job right, your risk register is a living document. It tells you where we're up to, what's happening, what's the risk of anything going wrong, what mitigation plans we've got in place, who's dealing with them, and the rest of it. If you imagine, so you kind of look through the fog and see behind here, we've got risks, we've got probability, we've got impact, we've got overall risk level. What are we going to do about it? Who's in charge of it? Are we on track or are we not on track? That is a fabulous couple of slide communication tool for anybody in the project. So you can say to them, you guys are doing all right, but we've got a bit of a delay over here. You need to think about what the knock-on effects of that might be. So yes, great job, but something that's coming down the track you need to be thinking about. And this is not used anywhere near enough as a fantastic tool for saying to people, hey, you want a snapshot of where we are? This is where we are. This is where the risk lies. This is what we're planning to do about it. Your jobs are A, B, and C. So don't look on it as a part of bureaucracy you just have to live with. Look at a positive tool for communicating where we're up to people. So it's very, very powerful way of, again, holding everything together. Particularly, the tenants are a little bit outside this in most cases, but in holding everything together for the supply chain, for your internal departments, guys, we've got a bit of a time crunch on this issue. You need everybody to help to sort that one out. Very powerful tool. So moving on to the challenge of alignment. So we talked about, where you get the information on the what, the why, and how of the project, and how you can constantly communicate where we're up to using the risk management part of it. Thinking about the alignment challenge. So you can align with strategy. What matters to the organization and the key individuals? Some topics will be internal to the organization and will be in the published strategy. So what does your organization strategy say? I mean, have you declared a climate crisis? What's your plan for dealing with the climate crisis? Can you show that this project is part of delivering some of those major objectives? Maybe you're trying to cut cost and repairs and maintenance on the housing stock. Okay, well, maybe doing proper retrofit and upgrade could actually cut future costs on repair and maintenance, or reduce voids, or improve the tenant satisfaction and health and well-being and all the kinds of other things. So what has your organization said about what it's trying to do, both internally and externally? What was the last speech the CEO made? What was in that? What promises were they making? And can you show that your project will help deliver the strategic objectives? And keeping an eye on those through the project. There can be specific external trends and drivers. Are there topics that this project needs to address? Perhaps fuel poverty is a big issue, or ill health caused by poor indoor air quality. Perhaps there are new regulations or legal obligations coming in the next few years. Pointing those out and showing how your project can contribute to addressing these issues, and will contribute, reminds everybody of the importance and shows how you're addressing these external drivers which are important. And what are the needs of the various stakeholders? Here's one of your colleagues. You need their help to deliver your project. He's already very busy. How are you going to persuade him? How will your project make his life easier? How will your project make him a hero? Because you're going to be dealing with lots and lots of people who have a whole bunch of other stuff on their desk, and a whole bunch of other KPIs they need to meet. So showing how this connects with their needs, their issues, is important. Again, both at the senior level, dealing with the executive team and any decision making that's going on, but also with the individual departments, teams, and individuals you need to work with. So you need to know what the story is. You need to align it with the various groups you need to talk to. You need to make sure that everyone is clear and remains clear throughout the project. And so we come to the challenge of telling the story effectively. The first part of that is simplifying the story. It's an extension of what I said about being able to write down the essence of the project on a side of A4. And a key communications idea is the elevator pitch. It's probably a story you've come across. You have a great idea, you meet the CEO in the elevator, and you have 20 seconds between floors to make your case. Not to cover all the detail, but to interest people. You'll get the chance for the detail later. You've got to grab their attention first. The marketers have an acronym for the journey you take a buyer on. AIDA, A-I-D-A, attention, interest, desire, action. No attention and interest, no action. So making the project meaningful to them, they will help you deliver it, and being able to distill it down to that essence, that core part. You develop your elevator pitch by communicating your project clearly and succinctly. You know, the language used can have a powerful impact. Use the language of the group you're talking to. What is the language of the tenants? Solving a particular problem will appeal to particular colleagues that need convincing. So thinking about the problem, the opportunity is, it is important because if only we could, it would fix this problem or create this opportunity. To do that, we need to be able to, and then the details come later. You've got to get through that first stage of grabbing their attention, showing them that there is something which can help with what they think is important. And then you can get into the detail. And the way you can structure this, classic way of constructing your communications, is with an inverted pyramid. You start with core information with a few simple words. You introduce your main argument, and then you move into further detail as required. Think about a newspaper article. You have the headline, you have the key takeaways immediately under that, and you then move on to the main story. So most important information, core information, extra information. That means that people can read as far as they want to in the newspaper report. Look at the title, they look at the standfast, and then they say, okay, yes, I am interested. I'm going to read the rest of this. It's exactly the same presenting to people and talking to people. Got to make sure that they understand what they're going to hear, what the importance is right up front. And the key advantage of this is that the key points are communicated first. You get into more detail, and that means that if you do have 20 seconds between floors, you already know what are the most important things to tell people. If you've got half-hour presentation, you've got time to do it. If you've got 1 page of A4, you know how to do it. If you've got 20-page report with all the details, you know how to structure it. So it's a really very useful tool. Comes out of journalism and writing for web, but it's really useful to know. And you need to adapt the message to your audience. So one way of doing that is something called stakeholder mapping. So you look at the level of stakeholder interest and the level of stakeholder influence in terms of the success of the project. If it's high interest and influence, you're going to be actively engaging with those people and very much targeting your messaging at them. In high influence, low interest, or high interest, low influence, they probably want to know what's going on. They need to be kept informed, And then there's a group which have neither influence nor particular interest, and you may need to monitor them because they may come into it later on. So it may be, for example, that, as I said, your procurement team is right up here and you've really got to work with them to get this project delivered. HR, somewhat less so, but there might come an issue if you lose staff from your project or have to change something. Maybe you need their involvement. Maybe legal is involved in the early stage of the project, and providing nothing goes wrong, then they're not needed any further. So thinking about who the stakeholders are and what their current state of influence and interest in is useful. Talking to individuals, so coming right down from the group to the individual. Where are they coming from? How are you going to interact with them? So this is a tool that I found immensely useful when trying to connect with and influence stakeholders. The advantage is you don't need to give someone a test or anything complicated. You just listen to how they talk and watch them in action. And you classify people on two axes. Are they naturally ask lots of questions, or are they naturally tell, providing a lot of information? And are they also emotionally closed, holding their cards close to their chest, or are they very open, heart on their sleeve? And this leads to 4 crude groups. So you have analyticals, who are information sponges. They like to think deeply and chew over the evidence. You've got drivers, action-oriented. They want 3 options and a recommendation, and they will decide, bang. You've got the amiables, interested in what it means for people. They need to feel comfortable with you. And then the expressives, creative, imaginative, always pushing the boundaries. This changes, they're given other names as well. Drivers are sometimes called directors, hawks, and so on. But it changes the way you talk to them and how you present your ideas. The amiable wants to hear about your team and your weekend in order to engage. The driver definitely does not want to do that. I mean, they're really not interested in you as an individual. Want to make a decision, get on with it. The expressives are bored by the detail that entrances the analyticals. And so if you're clever, you can adjust your pitch to the way your audience think and make decisions. And even when you've got a mixed group, you can just answer questions from them in specific ways. So there's a lot more information on the web about this tool and how you use it, but I find it very useful because it can be done on the fly. You just talk to people and you get a sense of where they are. And that tells you lots of useful information about how they want to receive information, how they make decisions, and how you connect with them. And then you're going to tell the story over and over again. As I said, you're going to tell it till you're sick of it. How do you do that? You have to have the passion. So even if you are bored with the story, it must not show through. Even if you are frustrated with the actions of some of the stakeholders whose help you need, who are really not getting the message, really not aligning, really not helping you, no matter how frustrated and bored you get by it, you have to keep engaging. And a really important part of that is a technique. Again, you can find lots of information about this on the web, called active listening. So this is a technique developed in consultancy and in psychotherapy, and it's a way of listening to people that elicits information from them. So going back to the social styles, I'm an expressive. Okay, if you want to get me involved in something, it's kind of, you say, just imagine if we could, and light the blue touch paper and stand back, and I'll be off and firing. The problem with that is I tend to override people. So I need to, when doing this kind of role of communicating a project, have to make sure I'm listening. Fortunately, there are ways and tools I can use to do that. So open questions. Don't push people to yes, no answers. Push people to express themselves. Not, do you think we should do this project? What concerns you about this project? It's a completely different way of asking a question and listening that gets more information out of people, brings them in, engages them, makes them part of the conversation. So another part of active listening is playing back what you have heard, paraphrasing what you just heard. Okay, so you talked about a number of concerns. The one that seems to be biggest for you is a worry about whether we can meet the timescale. Tell me more about that. Why do you think the timescale is a particular problem? Not so, do you think we should extend the project by a year? Because that's a yes/no answer. But playing it back to them, because if you get it wrong, and they can come back and say, no, it wasn't. The timescale wasn't the most important thing I was worried about. I was more worried about X. And you actually get more valuable information out of them, and you involve them in a conversation. You bring them into discussing the project with you rather than just pushing information to them. So, senior management buy-in is essential. A good plan on its own is insufficient, which means you need to tell a story to secure their support. And you have to fight for mind space, which means you need to connect with your senior leaders in the space they inhabit, dealing with the issues that they're dealing with. And you need to start early to build momentum. With all the stakeholder groups, you need to connect with their priorities. Look at strategy, external drivers, issues, goals of different functions and different groups. Look at the objectives of specific managers. Always be able to distill your plan into an elevator pitch. Just in case you're not taking the stairs one day, always be ready to give that 30 seconds on what your project is about and why it matters at any moment and to anybody. If you can't do that, you haven't mastered your own project. And if you get permission from that initial 30 seconds, you can move on to going into the detail. If you start off with the detail, you lose people before it starts. Don't forget AIDA: attention, interest, desire, action. Adjust your pitch to the audience. Think about where they're coming from, what the problems are, their objectives, and what type of person they are. That enables you to adjust the story. Because you've got the story really embedded in your mind, you know all the key points, you can emphasize the things that connect to them. You can adjust the way you tell it, the words you use, the detail you give, depending on where they fall on the social styles matrix. Because you're looking for connection. Keep telling the story until you're sick of telling it, and tell the story as it changes through the process, because this is an entirely dynamic process. Yeah, we got phase one done brilliantly. We're now up to here. The next set of issues are, right, from the different departments. This needs to happen. If you like, as you repeat month by month through the project, that elevator pitch is changing. Right now, we're still trying to achieve this. And the big issues we've got now are the following. That's what we're going to act on. And in particular, stress it a little bit because it's the obvious thing. You need to convince more than the leadership team. You need to convince everybody. And you can use the same ideas to build stories for all the other groups you need support from. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Project grows, evolves, and draws people in. If you do that, you can make it their story too. And once it's their story as well, you have their support and their continued commitment. Okay, so that's all I have to say. I hope some of those ideas are useful to you.